Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Deschutes Public Library online programming. I'm Laurel Westendorf, part of the Community Relations team, and today's presentation is the Spotted Bat Citizen Science Project with Sara Rose. Sara Rose is the Volunteer Coordinator for the Spotted Bat Project, hosted by the Northwestern Bat Hub and OSU-Cascades Lab. Sara also helps to coordinate and conduct large-scale bat monitoring and research across the Pacific Northwest. She received her BS from OSU Cascades in Natural Resources, Fish and Wildlife Conservation. Before joining Bat Hub, she completed wildlife research internships with the Deschutes National Forest and Cardiff University at the Research Center in Malaysia. She's also participated in the Sierra Nevada Red Fox and Golden Eagle research, among other things. Thank you for joining us, Sara, and letting us regular people know how we can get involved in this citizen science project with our local bat species.
Thank you so much for having me, Laurel. There we go. So as Laurel said, this is about the Spotted Bat Project, which is a citizen science project from the Northwestern Bat Hub. Before we dive into any of the technicalities about bats or the project, I'm just going to do a little bit of background for you, in case you haven't heard of the Northwestern Bat Hub. So that's actually an abbreviation. Our full title is the Northwestern Hub for Bat Population Research and Monitoring. And we are we like to call ourselves a center of gravity for bat research in the Pacific Northwest. And what this essentially means is that we work with a number of agency partners, state and federal, wildlife managers and land managers, and bring people together so that the bat monitoring and research that occurs in the Pacific Northwest is comprehensive but not redundant. Essentially, we help to organize, facilitate, and conduct large-scale, regional-scale monitoring of bat species. And we do this a lot with the National Park Service, the Forest Service, Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife, and other partners in California, Oregon, Washington, and Idaho. And the Northwestern Bat Hub is a part of the Humans and Ecosystems Resiliency and Sustainability Lab, also known as the HERS Lab, which is in itself a partnership between Oregon State University Cascades and the National Park Service. We do have other departments within the lab. We've got some folks studying vegetation, others looking at pica, and we rotate through different projects from year to year. Now, you might be wondering why there needs to be a bat hub. Why is there this group of people who's bringing all of these agency folk together to study bats? And there are two main reasons for this. The first one is that bats are difficult. This here is a quote from one of the co-founders of the HERS Lab, Tom Rodhouse. He's an ecologist with the National Park Service. Bats are very difficult to study, and doing strategic conservation of bats is greatly impeded by lack of basic information about the status and trend of populations across large regions. The reason for this is pretty simple, and it boils down to bats' biology. They are small and nocturnal. They move quickly and sometimes over great distances. And then here in the Pacific Northwest, our bats do not hang out in huge groups like you see elsewhere, such as in the Southwest or the eastern half of the US. You're not going to go to a cave in the Pacific Northwest and find 10,000 bats. It'd be much easier to study them that way, but ours are far more dispersed than that, and so they can be very difficult to locate. The other reason that all of these groups need to come together to study bats is because there's a great number of threats to bat populations, especially in the US right now. One of the biggest threats to bat populations is a fungal infection called white nose syndrome. It has been ravaging the populations of bats in the eastern US, and we are concerned for our populations here in the West. Other threats include wind energy farms, which can be very dangerous for certain species of bats, widespread pesticide use, and right now especially, we worry about public perception and how that may affect bats in the long term. So there are a lot of reasons that we need a large collaborative effort to monitor these very important animals. They're critical for our ecosystems and for our recreation because they eat a lot of mosquitoes. So they're just an incredibly important group of animals. Now, for those who don't know, we're going to go over just the very most basic of bat biology. Bats belong to the order of Chiroptera. They are mammals. They are the only true flying mammals, and the Latin name Chiroptera roughly translates to hand wing. And as you can see here in this little cartoon, those are finger bones that stretch out through the bat's wings. So they have highly maneuverable flight because they have all these joints within their wings. So if it ever looks like bats are doing acrobatics in the air, just know that they're doing them with the power of jazz hands. Now, bats are an incredibly diverse group. They are the second most specious group of mammals, second only to rodents. There are somewhere between 1,400 and 1,500 species of bat worldwide. They range greatly in size, shape, color, lifestyle, nose shape. Some of them have very frilly noses. Some have almost invisible ears. Others have gigantic ears. They're just an incredibly diverse group. And we have about 15 species here in the Pacific Northwest. All of our bats here are relatively small, and they all eat insects. Now, the subject of this study is the spotted bat, which is named for the 3 polka dots on its back. It is the only bat in the Pacific Northwest that has any sort of polka dots whatsoever. So if you can get close to one, they're fairly easy to identify. They have a few other distinguishing characteristics. The first one being these very large ears. They can range from gray to more pink in color, but they're always enormous. And when the bat is not flying, it actually drains the blood from its ears and folds them up around its head, which is pretty darn adorable, like makes its own little blanket out of its ears. They have these kind of bright white bellies, relatively simple noses as bats go, and then they have a relatively long tail for bats as well, and it's connected to their hind legs by a stretch of skin called the patagium, and it actually aids them in flight and maneuverability. Now, spotted bats are unique in the way they look, but they are also unique in the way that they live. So all of our bats here are insectivorous, but some are generalists and they'll eat any bug that they can fit in their mouths, and some are more specialized, and spotted bats are among the more specialized hunters, and they primarily eat larger moths. And these moths that they like to eat tend to fly fairly high compared to other insects, and so the spotted bats are also a high-flying species. Now, that contributes to the fact that they like to live in cliffs. So if you can imagine the really dramatic landscapes of central and eastern Oregon, places like Smith Rock, Lake Billy Chinook, Fort Rock, those are the kinds of places that spotted bats like to roost. They are relatively solitary. They don't roost in colonies. They don't like to hang out with other bats, which is very unusual. Even here in the Pacific Northwest, where our bats don't like to roost in enormous groups, they still, some species like to gather, you know, a few dozen to a few hundred, but spotted bats are not that way. They like to hang out by themselves. They are also unique in the frequency at which they echolocate. It's a lower frequency call than our other bats here in the Pacific Northwest. We'll talk about why that's important. But first, a little bit of understanding of how we find bats. I mentioned that they are difficult, so we do have some specialized equipment. We go out into the field and set up microphones at the top of 10-foot poles, and we attach them to these specialized devices called acoustic monitors. And these monitors can pick up the echolocation calls of bats. They're generally ultrasonic frequency calls, So they are above the range of human hearing. So we have to have specialized microphones and specialized equipment to pick up those calls. I myself have spent the last 2 summers setting up these systems all across Oregon and a little bit in Northern California. And it's a really fantastic way for us to monitor these animals. It's completely unobtrusive. We don't have to capture them. And what's really fantastic is that when we bring these calls back to the office, with a combination of specialized software and highly trained individuals, we can find out exactly what species of bat made a given echolocation call, because they all produce these sounds at different frequencies, which is pretty fantastic. And it's a wonderful tool for us to try to map where our bat populations are. But spotted bats make this really difficult. We have been surveying bats in Oregon as a lab for the last 4 years. The Forest Service and a few other agencies have been doing it a little bit longer than that. And we have not been finding near as many spotted bats as we expect to. And we haven't been finding them across the range that we expect to find them. And we think that, well, quite frankly, everything about them is contributing to this. The fact that they fly so high means that they might be out of the range that our specialized microphones can pick them up. We have to set up the microphones in such a way as to record as many bat species as possible. So we're getting the other 14 species of bat, but we're missing the spotted bats. Now, we also have these microphones set up to record those ultrasonic frequencies. But as I mentioned, spotted bats echolocate at a lower frequency. It's within the range of human hearing, and we think that it's possible that our detectors struggle to pick up these calls, especially when they're being produced further away from the microphone by flying so high. So all of these things kind of come together to make it very difficult for us to really understand where spotted bats are on the landscape. We know that they like the dramatic landscapes, the cliffs, deep canyons, rocky areas. We know that they prefer arid landscapes, so eastern and central Oregon, but we're just not finding them. And so we are calling out to the public and asking for help in that matter, because it turns out that darn near anyone can, with a decent sense of hearing, that is, can learn to identify a spotted bat call. So the way that people can help us is by joining our citizen science project. And doing so is relatively simple. This year it's a bit more complicated than it has been in previous years, but a spotted bat survey essentially looks like this. Let me So our volunteers go out to a dramatic landscape and listen. And that call that I just played was an actual spotted bat call with a little bit of cricket noise in the background. And that is exactly what it sounds like when a spotted bat flies past you. So as you can imagine, it's pretty easy for people to go out and know whether or not a spotted bat is nearby. And so we have put together this project, and the basic steps are that we give people access to an interactive map. There are over 100 survey locations on this map, so people can choose almost any kind of place to go in Central Oregon to listen for spotted bats. Now, some places are more likely to actually have spotted bats present, but it's important for us to survey all of the different kinds of landscapes because we just don't know and we may be surprised. So after volunteers choose a location, they can then choose any date that they want to go out and survey. In an ideal world, each of our 120 locations would be surveyed once in June, once in July, and once in August. That's a little ambitious, but we're hoping to get there eventually. But the point that I really want to drive home is that this is a very flexible and kind of open-ended project. Volunteers can choose how much they want to participate, when they want to participate, and where. So it's very flexible and it can accommodate all levels of outdoorsiness. And once people get to their locations, they just listen for spotted bats for 1 hour after sunset. And the data collection process is fairly simple. We have worked with a group called SitSci and developed a little data collection form in an app. So it's very simple. You download the app and you just kind of record every time you see a spotted bat when you're out for a survey, and that information will automatically be sent to us. So it's a relatively simple process. Yeah. Now, normally what we like to do is train people in person. Last year we had some training events out at Smith Rock, and we would have about 15 people come, and we would go out and actually get to listen to spotted bats together. Obviously, things are a little bit different this year. Social distancing, coronavirus precautions require a change of plans. So we do have an online training available. It overlaps a little bit with this presentation, but not too much. There is a link for that video on the Spotted Bat website, on the OSU website. And it also is very searchable on YouTube. It's the only spotted bat volunteer training video that you're gonna find if you type those words in. And then we did just recently get approval from the university to start scheduling very, very small, socially distant in-person trainings. There have been some folks who have had issues distinguishing between spotted bat calls and cricket noise, and training in person is always going to make those kinds of processes a little bit easier. So if folks are interested in setting up a small group training, they are encouraged to reach out to me. We will take all precautions. We will stay socially distant and wear masks and not share any equipment nor vehicles. We want to accommodate people as much as possible to try to get folks excited about this project, because we certainly are. We have a lot of work to do, and this project is fairly new. This is only our second year asking volunteers to participate. So we want to get as much excitement garnered about this as possible. And that's actually all I have for you folks today. It was a fairly straightforward project, and I'm just so appreciative to have this opportunity to talk to you guys about it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sarah. Your contact info and the Spotted Bat YouTube video can both be linked down below, but obviously you can see how to contact Sarah up on this slide. I had never realized how many species of bats we had in this area, and having been to Carlsbad Caverns and seen, you know, the huge amount of bats, it never occurred to me that we don't have anything like that here, and that bats just might prefer to be more solitary. How interesting.
Yeah, it's pretty fascinating. I was really lucky this past winter. I was able to participate in a hibernacula survey with the Forest Service, and we went into Lava River Cave, which obviously is an enormous cave, and we walked the entire length of it and only found 6 bats, which I guess is not terribly unusual. And they were scattered. They weren't all hanging out together. Yeah, so it's really, really interesting, and very, very challenging as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think it's fun that, you know, this kind of research project will allow the community to go out to these beautiful places, because that's something that the bats and us have in common. So
exactly. Yeah, it's a nice intersection of like recreation and science.
Mm-hmm.
It's just,
very cool.
Yeah.
Well, I hope this garners a lot of interest and appreciation for our fun and adorable jazz hand bat species that I will never stop thinking about jazz hands. And
Yep.
thank you so much, Sarah.
Thank you.